that's necessary. Because if it's contingent, like is that? Come on, guys, like that's not a trinity, right? Like that, I don't know what that is.
Mm. I,
Mm. Like
Dr. Ryan Mullins, somebody wants to ask. So he brings forth this challenge to neoclassical theism, as it's known in academia, which is basically that, like, if classical theism is negated and God can be subject to accidents, God can be subject to multiplicities, and so on and so forth, from what you expect from negating classical theism, how can you justify that this conception of entity is distinguished from this set of all contingencies? Like how Ibn Sina says, for example, in his contingency argument, the set of all contingencies, he justifies this not by some inductive method saying we look around and everything is dependent, rather more so everything has its essence distinguished from existence. It's not self-derivative and it's not identical to existence. But in the case of God, it is pure existence. So how would it be for your case to like distinguish this set of all contingencies and God itself?
Yeah, so Timothy O'Connor's done some really good work on this. So in Timothy O'Connor's book, Theism and Ultimate Explanations, he looks at this objection and he does it in a couple other places. So here's the idea. Um, so you could say, like, sure, let essence and existence, these are distinct things. And when we're looking at contingent creatures, we're part of the essence of a creature is that it's contingent. Like that's part of its essence. When you're talking about the case of God, part of the essence of God is that he is a necessarily existent being. So so just being able to distinguish essence and existence doesn't entail contingency because the essence of a thing might be necessary existence.
Mhm. It's good. Uh, Abdurrahman, you can speak now.
Hello, can you
Yeah, I
hear
can hear
me?
you.
Okay, so my question is about the Trinity. Is did any like the church fathers like before like believe in Trinity, or was like how was the Trinity came to be? I'm confused.
I'm sorry, you cut out a bit. I know it's about the Trinity and something about the church fathers, but you cut out. I didn't hear all the question.
Like my question is who's like the like who made the Trinity? Like was it like a doctrine that like Jesus believed in, or like was it like something that came after Jesus?
I think historical
Oh,
questions are kind of off topic. You can answer
I,
if you
I
want, but
I can
yeah.
I can answer to some extent. I mean, it's not like my main area of expertise. So here's what the standard Christian story will say is that when you're looking at the New Testament documents as a whole, you see a common theme of there are three. There's the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, all being said to be divine, and then all this talk about there being one God, and they're like, well, gosh, how do I make sense of that? And then you've got all the debates that come after that to make sense of that New Testament claim. And so what you and that suppose the standard story is it culminates in the Council of Nicaea in 325, and that's where you get the like what we now officially call the doctrine of the Trinity. But the story is like way more complicated than that, and Nicaea didn't settle anything because there's always debates that happen afterwards. But the idea is there's this biblical claim of three divine persons, one God. How do we make sense of it? Let me give you an example of this. I'm editing this book series on the doctrine of God, and one of the books in the series is edited by Chad McIntosh. It's going to be called "The Trinity: Four Views," and William Lane Craig. This is really surprised all of us. His what he's going to defend now is just what he calls biblical trinity. There's three divine persons and one God. No more to say. And all the other contributors were super annoyed with that because they're like, come on, there's more to say. And he's like, nope, no more to say, which I think is really, really cheeky. But what you see with Craig is him going like, let's just go back to the basics. Any sort of development that comes after that gets technical and I don't have to believe it. Whereas a lot of Christians are going, no, you do have to believe that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm rambling now, so I'll stop.
Mm. Right, the answer is that guy's question. Somebody asked in the chat, what is the most convincing argument for Islam?
Oh, I don't know because I am still very much an amateur with Islamic theology. Like it's only been within the last few years that I've started to read different Islamic thinkers and talk to some different Islamic scholars to try to help me understand what on earth is going on. So yeah, I can't answer that question. I'm too much of an amateur.
Right, great. Uh, Dr. Khalil Andani wants to ask you a question, but audio is glitching out for some reason. It's the same
Hmm.
glitch that happened to me earlier.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's just really from Discord. That's all issue. All right, somebody wants to come up and ask a question now.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Hey, doctor. I was gonna ask a question regarding divine simplicity. Um, why is divine simplicity incompatible, like, with extrinsic change, like change happening in the world? It's like God's timelessness incompatible with that.
Yeah, so when you're looking at a lot of Christian thinkers, the claim is more focused on timelessness, and simplicity comes in to help save the day is kind of the move here. So here's the idea. Um, so so Saint Augustine, when he's looking at this particular question of there's certain relationship titles that we refer to God as. We refer to God as the Creator. Well, these relationship titles are something that God would come to have because, according to creation ex nihilo, there's some sort of prior state of affairs where God exists all alone. The universe is not co eternal with God. And so when the universe comes into existence, it seems like God becomes the creator and he comes to have this new relationship title of creator. And so that's a relational property or a relational accident, if you want to speak in these kind of medieval terms. And so that's going to be inconsistent with timelessness because to be timeless is to exist without succession, without change, without temporal location. If God comes to acquire a new property, even like in terms of like it's relational accident, then there's gonna be a state of affairs where God did not have that accident, and then a state of affairs where God did have that accident. So this is the sort of thing that Augustine's really worried about. And so what he does is he'll say the universe is really related to God in the sense that the universe has the accidental property of being created, but God is not really related to the universe in the sense that God does not have any accidental property at all that refers to the universe because a relationship on this medieval view is involves having either an essential or an accidental property that refers to something else. So that's supposed to be why um, that's why Augustine and these others deny that God undergoes these sort of accidental changes or these changes in relationships because you would have a before and after in God. Here's how that relates to divine simplicity, though. So people like Augustine, they're really clear that, yeah, well, I'm already committed to the idea that God doesn't have any accidents whatsoever. So now when I come to this question, does God have these accidental relational properties or these relationship terms? Well, I've already said God doesn't have any accidents. Well, you just pointed out another accident, so I'm just going to say, okay, well, God doesn't have that. So it's supposed to be these kind of like mutually reinforcing ways to defend timelessness. That's kind of the idea.
Yeah, I have another question regarding like the divine attributes. So
Hmm.
I'm guessing you take the stand that the attributes are distinct from the essence, right?
I take the essence just is distinct attributes. Like I don't quite understand the claim that there's essence and then there's attributes. These are different things, and I know there's a lot of people who will say that. I just don't know what that means.
Yeah, so like I'll define like the essence as to what what the thing is, and then also the attribute is going to be like characteristics or properties describing the essence, basically.
Just
That's
to
how
make
I'll
sure I'm following
define.
you first. So basically, like essence is just like a real definition. Is that how you're understanding it?
Yeah, like what it is, what something is.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So if you take if, let's just say that you take the stand that these like attributes are like causally efficacious, they're not like causally inert, and they're able to produce effects, and they're subsisting within God's essence, but they're not identical to God's essence. How wouldn't this lead to like some form of composition?
Uh, why are the attributes causally efficacious?
If they're so, if you say that God is all powerful by virtue of this attribute, right? And this attribute is able to say that God is merciful through his attribute of mercy, or God created this through his attribute of power, then power is able to produce effects, right? So even if the attribute isn't like the ultimate cause, like the first, like you see, like it's like still like to contribute to the cause. It's like a part of the cause or something, you would say. Um, then you cannot say like it's like causally inert. Then I would say, all right, because you're just like you have all these like concrete realities like subsisting within God.
Oh, okay. I think I understand what's going on here. So, uh, on my view, what has causal power are substances with their properties. So a thing, because no substance lacks properties. So every substance has some properties. So and it's the substances with their properties, their essences. Those are the things that have causal power. I don't take properties to be concrete. I take them to be abstracta. Um, so yeah, so there's a few claims in this argument I've already rejected. Um, but maybe you could still try to get the parts claim up and running. So I don't know, but go ahead and try. I might be missing something.
Oh, he left. Oh, one moment.
Oh,
Let me
he
try to
left.
bring
Okay.
him up. I'll wait 1 minute till he comes up again.
Okay, let me push a question then that the Ghazali brings up in this case, just because I've just been
Yeah.
reading him lately, and I just find him really entertaining. So when he looks at the question of are attributes parts, he just goes, "Why on earth should I think that attributes are parts? Like parts are things that can come apart. Essential attributes by definition cannot come apart. So like what's the thing about like why are these parts?" And when I've asked some different contemporary Mariologists about these issues, because I find Mariology in general very like parts and wholes very mysterious, uh, and I've asked them like, so what do you think about the issue of like God's properties? Do those count as parts? And they're like, why would properties count as parts? And I'm like, well, what counts as parts? And they're like, Mariology typically, at least today, focuses just on physical things. When you start talking about non-physical things, according to some of these Mariologists I was asking, they're like, I just lose my grasp on what you mean by parts. Sounds like you're using parts in a very weird way. And that's, I think, one of the concerns I have with some of these types of arguments in the history of philosophical theology is there's no clear meaning of what counts as a part, and so lots of people are like these are parts, and others are going to go, why is it a part? And I don't know what the argument is for why it's a part.
Okay.
Wait. Oh my God. He's disconnecting.
Oh no.
All right, I see him. If they're not here in the next 30 seconds, we'll just proceed with the next one.
Okay, that's fair.
All right, it's fine, whatever. Dr. Khalil Andani, we appreciate you being here. You can ask any question you want now.
Sure, thanks. Ryan, regarding Ghazali, right? When Ghazali does talk about the divine attributes, he does actually compare them to parts. So
Then why? I, I'm
why-
I'm confused by this. Because like so I was like reading a paper by John McGinnis quite recently, and he's like Ghazali just denies that these are parts.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so I understand that. That's in one text, but then what happens is that in his moderation and belief book,
Mm-hmm.
where he actually has like a more, as in his refutation of philosophers, he's deconstructive, but then in moderation and belief, Ghazali gives his own constructive theology. So in page 129 of the translation of Moderation and Belief, This is where Ghazali talks about the divine essence and the divine attributes. And I'll just read what he says, and you can tell me what you think. So, quote, this is Ghazali. If we say, quote, God the exalted, then we have referred to the divine essence together with the divine attributes and not to the essence alone. And he goes on to say, by example, Zaid's hand, so he's talking about the hand of a person. Zaid's hand is not Zaid and is not other than Zaid. Both expressions are absurd. Similarly, he says, and he's talking about the divine attributes. Similarly, every part is not other than the whole, nor is it the same as the whole. Thus, it is possible that an attribute is other than the essence in which the attribute subsists. So here, he actually evokes part whole relationships to tell us the relationship between multiple divine attributes and the divine essence. So wouldn't that would still fall under parthood relations, at least the way he said. You may not agree with him, of course, but what he's saying.
No, that's good. Can you say the name of the book again? Because, like I said, I'm still
Yeah.
really much an amateur at the Islamic stuff.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So this is Moderation in Belief. That's the translation. It's a pretty well-known translation. It's published in 2013. It's page 129. And I'll just add, this is not like a uniquely Ghazalian thing. Another thinker, Al-Nasafi, who's a Maturidi, in his book, he lives around the same time as Ghazali, and he makes the same point. And I'll quote, and this is all on my blog. You can read the quotes. So
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
that's who says, God's names and attributes are not identical to him and not other than him, just as in the case of the number one with regard to the number 10. So this, by Ghazali's time, among these Asharis and Maturidis, who of course they don't believe in divine simplicity, they do appeal to part whole relations to explain the attribute essence relation. Now, I know you said that's not your position, and that's fine, but I'm just speaking to what they say. The other thing I would just add is, now regarding Mariology, what I found helpful is that in the Stanford Encyclopedia entry on Mariology, while they definitely say we have many theories of Mariology, there are some, I don't know, five, three, four, five number. There's about three or four or five axioms. Okay, according to this entry, which are called capital M core Mariology. So there are a few axioms of core Mariology. According to this article, this is the starting point of all Mariological theories. So if you look at these axioms like reflexivity, transitivity, anti-symmetry, uh, all the Mariologies would have certain commitments in common, and these divine attributes, the way Ghazali talks about it or whoever, they would definitely count as parts under core Mariology, despite, as you say, all these other differences that Mariology theories will have.
Okay, so yes, this is good because so like I've said before, like I'm still very very new to actually getting into real Islamic scholarship. So yeah, so I guess I would just disagree with Ghazali on this point. Like I don't see why I should talk about uh, like God's attributes in terms of part whole relations. Yeah, so I'll just be disagreeing with him there, which is fine because I disagree with him on lots of other things too. Um, yeah, so what are some of the core axioms though? Could you remind me? Because it's been a while since I've read the Stanford Encyclopedia entry on this.
Sure. Yeah. So again, people can bring this up because it's online. So it's in under section 2.2 of the article, 2.1 and 2.2. So the first thing, everything is a part of itself. Okay, and then number seven, any part of a thing, any part of a thing is itself a part of a thing. So that's transitivity. And then
Mhm.
two distinct things cannot be part of each other. Okay, so those are among those axioms. So then what they do is they
Okay.
formalize it. So the first one, everything is a part of itself, is P1. The second one, transitivity, is P2. The third one is P3. And then it goes on to say like, so this whole thing is core mereology, and then he says, given P1, P2, and P3, a number of additional mereological predicates can be introduced by definition, and they show some diagrams. So proper parthood, equality, overlap, underlap. So for example, two parts may have an overlap. Two parts may have an underlap. They don't have the whole, and so on. So what I'm saying is, you can have this starting with capital, what they call capital M, core
Mhm.
mereology, right? And some, not all, and I'm not sure what your view is, but some of these construals of divine attributes being distinct, mutually distinct, and divine attributes being distinct from the divine essence, which at least the classical era, Asheris and Maturidi said, those would definitely fall into things of like proper parthood. But I don't know what your view is. You were saying something about it just a few minutes ago. So you don't have like a divine essence per se, right? That's sort of distinct from each divine attribute. Is it for you the divine essence uh, is constituted by all these attributes?
By the way, sorry for interrupting. This would be the last question we've had like a long time
Oh,
with Khalid.
Oh, sorry.
If
Well,
yeah.
you
look,
can
So
go on.
I didn't mean to interrupt, so you don't have to take my question. You can ask, you can get someone
No,
else's
yeah, it's
question.
fine. It's fine. I'm just like letting everybody know because we have organized formulas between who's gonna ask after and so on. But yeah, you can go on with answering the question now.
yeah, sorry. So I asked for the follow up because I was curious. Yeah. So yeah, this is good. So the first point about like everything is like a part of itself. I always found that so mysterious. And when I've pushed a lot of Mariologists on this, I'm like, so like the number one is a part of itself, and they're like, yeah, overlapping parts. I'm like, it overlaps. It just is. It's like this is where why I said earlier I find the whole discussion about part whole just very mysterious because I find that first axiom just really weird and bizarre. Which is not an argument against it. It's just me confessing. I just find it really weird and bizarre.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
yeah, and then I forgot what my other point was. Yeah, it's gone. Sorry. Oh, the essences. Yeah, that's what you asked. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, there we go. I take an essence just to be a definition of like of like what a thing's attributes would have to be. Um, so if I want to talk about like a bovine essence, I'm like, okay, what are the properties that a thing has to have in order to be a cow? uh and if I talk about a divine essence, I'm like, okay, well, that's just a description of the kind of properties a thing needs to be in order to be divine. um that's yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
But what is in essence ontologically? So the account you gave me is sort of essence conceptually, i.e.,
Hmm.
when I'm thinking of a definition of a cat, or you're thinking of that, that's what you just defined, which is fine. That's like a conceptual essence. But what is an essence extramentally? So when we talk about God extramentally, are there like real distinctions in this divine being, or are these distinctions between God's power and God's knowledge, they're only in like the concepts that I have or you have?
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to say there's the substance that has these extra mentally distinct properties. Yeah. Yeah.
But what's so extramentally, how would you construe the relation between the substance and those extramental properties, distinct ones that it has?
uh like just like an imminent universal or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know how you construe it. Like, so let me give you an example. For the Ghazali type tradition, they would say the divine attribute, or what you're calling an extramental property, they would say it subsists in or through the essence. That's like their construal of it. What would be your construal of that?
I would say it subsists in the substance, because I feel like the essence, again, well, yeah, because like I said before, I think the essence just is like the definition, is like its concept. So if I've got the property subsisting in the substance, I don't know what adding in the essence. I don't know what that adds to the story.
That could only be a semantic issue because you're using substance, which is fine. So you would say the distinct divine properties. This is extramentally. They extramentally subsist in the divine substance. Is that your view?
Yeah, yeah.
And then is there a what's the dependence relations there? So do these extramental divine properties, are they dependent on the divine substance, or is the divine substance dependent upon those, or are they like interdependent?
I mean, there's a very weak sense in which they're interdependent because no thing can exist without its properties, but the properties can't exist without the thing. And since God is a necessarily existent being, it's logically impossible for you to find God without these properties and these properties without God. So it's a very very weak sense of dependent, like intermutual like dependence.
But
So
what
it's
is
kind of
the sorry, go ahead.
yeah, sorry, it's kind of similar to like the discussions like the EJ Lowe has on the difference between existence dependence and essence dependence, how like those things are like mutually entailing in the case of God.
I want to ask more, but I'm mindful of the time, and the people in the chat are saying I'm
Oh,
talking
sure.
too
Yeah,
much.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, fair enough.
All right. Would that be it for you, Dr. Khalil?
I don't want to take up the whole time. We should let other people ask him questions.
Right. Yeah, thanks for the questions. So let's see who was here. Oh yeah, I'll ask. Somebody asked in chat way before, like earlier, about something about aseity. So Dr. Reinman, somebody asked if God's essence is not self-explained. No, if God's essence is self-explained, my bad. Then is there a need for the attributes? Basically, he's saying if God's essence is self-explained, but it's in this like interdependency relation with his attributes, then it's now self-explained because his own content doesn't suffice for its own reality. But if it did suffice for its own reality, then it could exist without its attributes. How would you respond to this?
Can you repeat that last part because I think I misunderstood it.
The last part. Oh yeah. If it doesn't exist without its attributes, then its content doesn't suffice for its own reality. But if it is the case that it can suffice for its own reality, then it does. What is it called? Wait, I read the question wrong. Hold on.
Okay, yeah, because yeah, sorry, that's why I was like I think I'm not understanding the question anymore.
Okay, yeah. If God's essence is self-explained, then it could suffice for its own reality, independent of any other reality, whether it be a positive ontological item or not. But if it cannot, then it's dependent on them. But if it can, then those positive ontological items are contingent.
I think the reason I'm not quite understanding the question is because I'm viewing things very differently. So I'm thinking that like no substance can exist without properties, and no properties can exist without substances. And I'm taking essence just to be a description of the kind of attributes that God has. It's not like this other thing. Um, so when I'm looking at God and God's attributes, I'm like, okay, well, what are those attributes? One of them is aseity. And can aseity exist without God? I don't know what it means for aseity to exist without God, and nor do I know what it means to say that God exists without aseity. Because
I
it's just
think it's more so
yeah.
that like a God is not a say to begin with, or this conception of God.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I don't. Then I don't understand like the what the objection is exactly. Because it seems like it's got some assumptions in there that I don't have. I'm not sharing. So maybe that's just it. It's yeah. I'm just rejecting some of the assumptions in the question,
Mm.
or
Just
it
give
might
him
be
like
I'm just completely
I'll give him a
misunderstanding the
minute.
question.
Yeah, yeah, I'll give him a minute to rephrase the question. Then I'll just proceed. It's fun. Just leave it. Nitrous, you can ask.
Hey guys, Ryan, I have a question for you. Do you think that divine simplicity is compatible with a rejection of necessitarianism?
Oh, can you say that the last you cut out for the is divine simplicity compatible with what?
With a view that doesn't hold to necessitarianism?
Okay. No, I don't see how I can avoid necessitarianism with if I so say I affirm divine simplicity, I do not know how to affirm some sort of contingent reality um, without. Well, okay, you know what? Here's one way. I think it's super weird, but here's one way. So you could say that the omnipotent God has an indeterministic link between what he wills to bring about and what comes about. So here's the claim, and tell me if you think this is really omnipotence. So God says, you know what? I really, out of all the universes I could create, I really like number 27. Universe number 27 is pretty cool. So God wills to bring about universe number 27. But there's this indeterministic link between what God wills and what actually comes about. So God tries to bring about universe number 27 and nothing happens. Like, oh gosh, okay, that's weird. Guy's like, that's okay. It's I've got this indeterministic link. Let me try again. And he tries to get universe 27. Well, universe 1038 pops up. And you're like, oh gosh, that's not what I was trying to do. Let me try again. And on you go. So if there's this indeterministic link between God's like what God wills and what comes about, then supposedly you can get divine simplicity and a contingent reality. The problem I think with this is I don't see how this is omnipotence anymore. And maybe you can just go, that's fine. I prefer simplicity over omnipotence. Um, that's I guess that's a thing you could say. So yeah, that could be a way to try to get simplicity without necessitarianism.
Okay, so but then when it comes to the sorry, there's a lot of noise. When it comes to the modal collapse argument of yours, like I know that Smith has an argument from omniscience and from intentionality, but when it comes to your modal collapse argument, it seems to presuppose a sort of contrastive PSR in order for you to have that inference that, oh, if God is divinely simple, then God's acts are like necessary. And if that's like if you're presupposing such a principle, it just seems very odd, given that you yourself reject the PSR, and you know that many classical theists don't hold to such a PSR. But if you have like an argument from like omniscience for intentionality, those I find more interesting than like the classical modal collapse argument you formulated.
I think I'm a bit confused. So like the modal collapse argument that I develop focuses on a lot of different thinkers who say that God's free to create or not create, and so I'm saying, well, that's inconsistent with divine simplicity because if God's action is identical to his necessary existence, it's going to have to be necessary. Um, and also, I don't reject the PSR. So I think I'm kind of confused about the question. So the modal collapse argument I lay out is looking at these explicit claims from certain thinkers of God is free to create or not create. Um, PSR doesn't
Mhm.
exactly come in, and then independently, I do affirm the PSR.
Well, I think the PSR comes in when you want to say that just because God's action is necessary, therefore his effects are necessary, right? But I think
Oh, that's not from the PSR. That's from the infallibility of omnipotence. So when I'm looking at like some medievalists who like really explicitly like Aquinas and Bonaventure and all these types, they're like whatever God wills must come about. Like that's how they see it. So I'm looking at the infallibility of omnipotence, and that's what I say in several of the papers.
but that inference there has nothing to do with the PSR. So if someone, for example, first
Go
would
ahead.
like reject like that God contrastive that God explains these contrastive facts, you'd say he'd run into the same issue. I think you'd not on your model not avoid such an issue. Like if you think this is an issue, I think you'd have the same issue um with God's will. How are you going to explain how God has this will over, let's say, another will, right? I think
Mhm.
it just seems like an indeterministic um, like it's like it's similar to the indeterministic effects on, like, let's say, a Thomistic model, right?
Yeah. So Aquinas himself and doesn't have this indeterministic effects thing. That's like this much later weird kind of convention, because Aquinas affirms the infallibility of omnipotence. That if God wills X, then X has to come about. Otherwise, God's not omnipotent. That's the claim, and I think that's right. Where I guess if I'm understanding correctly, the worry of, like, if the PSR is, do all explanations have to be contrastive explanations? That's an independent issue of whether or not you think omnipotence is infallible. Um, because here's where you're getting a lot of the contingency in some of these late scholastic views, late scholastic thinkers. The contingent is supposed to come in, that in the sense that God's will is contingent, because God has different reasons, and none of those reasons are, all those reasons to create or not create are justifying reasons, but they are not necessitating reasons. And so God's supposed to be the case that he could will either way, and he's got good reason to will either way, um, but he's not necessitated to will either way, and that's supposed to be the source of contingency. But the infallibility of omnipotence is still in that idea of, if God does will this way, then all these things are supposed to follow.
And just quickly before, this will be my last question. I want to, this is going to be my last question. I don't want to ask too many questions. Obviously, there are a lot of people waiting. But I mean, that's going to presuppose some, I mean, there are Thomistic philosophers and other philosophers who, classical theists, who are going to introduce some, like, for extrinsic account of knowledge, right, to avoid this issue, right? Are you saying that this is like unorthodox? But that's obviously going to depend on, like,
Yeah.
their interpretation of Aquinas. I've seen, like, what's his name again? I forgot his name. He had
Are
a
you thinking of Matthews Grant?
no, it was another guy.
Lonergan?
No, the guy who wrote on intentionality, who focuses a lot on that. I forgot his name. The
Oh,
Scottish
sorry, I
one.
can't help you.
The MMA fighter.
Oh, Gavin
I
Kerr?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, I think he's Irish, actually, but yeah.
Or Irish, sorry, yeah. But I know that they interpret Aquinas differently, right? And say that there's such an account of intentionality and knowledge would be compatible with his text. So I think that's gonna depend on, like, an interpretation, right?
Yeah, to some extent. So I'm in this debate book on divine simplicity. I think it's 5 views now. It was originally supposed to be 4, and now we got up to 5 somehow. And so W. Matthews Grant, he wants to do this so-called extrinsic knowledge and extrinsic action interpretation. So one of the things I've been developing in my reply is to find these quotes from Aquinas saying, how dare we say that God's action is extrinsic to him? So I don't know how Grant's gonna deal with that yet, because we haven't gotten to that part of the process of the book. But yeah, as part of it is me just finding these quotes where Aquinas says no, like that's not right. Um, and then another part of it is just trying to look at a bunch of different medieval scholars, and they're saying, like, no, these things are intrinsic. And then finally, this is the biggest. Um, when I looked at a lot of these, like W. Matthews Grant's book, where he gives this full-fledged defense of extrinsic action and extrinsic knowledge, I have no idea what it means. And when I've been reading through all of his work, he gives less and less detail as he progresses. So in his more recent papers, there's even less detail on what extrinsic action and what extrinsic knowledge even mean. So there's a very serious question here about the intelligibility of the statement. If extrinsic knowledge just means there's a bunch of facts out there in the world, I don't have any intrinsic features about me that are representing those facts, but I know all the things in virtue of there's a bunch of facts out there, then you and I are both omniscient, without even having to know anything. And that seems like the wrong result. So I've got this worry about, is it even intelligible? And then I've also got this worry of you and I just automatically become omniscient without having to change anything about our mental contents. And that seems wrong.
All right. Who was asking? Yeah, Asami, you can ask now.
All right. So I have a question with regards to something you said about the attributes and how they are in relation to the essence. Did I hear you right, or um, did you say that basically the attributes compose God's essence? Like, is that how you put it, basically?
Not composed, because I don't think it's a composition relation.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think it's you've got a substance and it has these properties inhering in it, but I don't think it's a composition relation.
Yeah, but like if you say that these attributes are in the essence, like it basically arises this problem of like predicating a part to a whole. I mean, like in a sentence, you can say that a house is the wall that basically is part of that house. You can't predicate it this way. So in the same way, you can't predicate a part of God to the whole. It wouldn't make sense. It's basically like saying that a part is equal to the whole. So like, how would you solve this problem?
Well, since I don't think it's a part-whole relationship, um, I'm not seeing a problem because I'm not trying to say there's this part and I'm attributing it to the whole. I'm just saying it's just
Yeah,
not even a part-whole relationship. So I think I'm missing the what the objection is.
yeah, but like, if you say that the attributes are in the essence, and I assume you would say that the attributes are not like equal or identical to each other, then I don't see any other way. Like it has to be like basically parts composing the essence, because if the attributes are not identical to each other and they are in the essence, it's just basically parts, right?
I don't see why they're parts. So let's go through some examples here. So uh, I love my wife. Um, I've got the property of loving, and you say, well, that's a part of you, and I'm like, well, metaphorically, sure, but is it literally a part of me? I don't know what that. I lose my grasp on the word part in this case.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I think. Mm, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, and I was just going to give one other example. So if I don't even know what's a good movie that's out. I haven't seen any good movies. So I was going to say like, what's your favorite part of that movie? And you're like, its existence. Uh, I think if you said that, I would realize very quickly when I asked you what your favorite part of the movie was that I was speaking metaphorically. And then if you said existence is literally a part, I I would really scratch my head at this. And this is an example that Christopher Hughes gives when he's trying to explain what just like Aquinas's understanding of like the part whole relation is, and he says a lot of metaphysicians are going to really scratch their head at the idea that existence is literally a part. And I'm like, yeah, I am really scratching my head at that. I feel like I lose my grasp on the meaning of part, literally a part.
Yeah, I think that's like the main reason like many Islamic theologians actually like made a distinction between a conceptual part and like a physical part. So like for example, a physical part would be what a wall is to a house. This is like something which is experimentally a reality. It's composed in reality. Therefore, you can't predicate the part of the house to the house itself because it's not equal to each other. And but like a conceptual part, for example, would be something to do with the essence. So like a human is has the rational faculty and also is an animal, but in reality there's nothing experimentally called rationality and then being an animal. It's something which is conceptual, so it's only composed in the mind but not experimentally. So I don't really agree with you that Mariology is mysterious. It's just like people don't formulate it correctly most of the time. It's the main problem is people do not make a uh, distinction between conceptual parts and physical parts.
Is there? This is I don't know if you can answer this or not. Maybe somebody else can. So in John Duns Scotus's view, he says there's something in between conceptual and like physical or real distinctions. And so the formal distinction is supposed to be this thing that we're like, well, it's not really parts because they can't come apart, but they are experimentally distinct. Do you guys have something like that in Islam? Because I've been told that Scotus's view is similar to Al-Maturidi, but my knowledge of this is based on secondary literature and not I've not because I've
Yeah.
not actually read much reading.
So, I would say that the early or classical era metaphysicians for the Ash'aris and Maturidis basically have this similar idea actually to Scotus, but the late ones, the ones like usually after it's considered like an era after this person called Fakhr ad-Din al-Razi, like
Oh
everyone,
yeah, this
including
guy.
him, like they would basically describe it differently, completely differently. They would say that the attributes are actually implications of the essence and they are possible in on themselves. However, they're necessary by virtue of the essence. So the essence necessitates these attributes, but because of this, the attributes are basically possible in on themselves and necessary by virtue of the essence. It's a slightly different view. Yeah, so like the I would say that the classical era metaphysicians would agree with Scotus. Yeah,
Okay, yeah. So I need to get into this more. This is good. Thank you.
anytime. I enjoyed talking to you. I have to go now. Yeah, thank you for
Okay.
everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, who's Kara? You can ask.
Yeah, I have a few questions if possible. So yeah, Dr. Mullins, my first question is going to be regarding reduplicative predication and whether you find this to be a valid solution to the logical problem of the incarnation.
Um, in some cases, yes, but not in all cases. I don't think the reduplicative strategy works in all cases. So should we explain that to everyone, or do you think everyone knows what that is? The reduplicative strategy.
Right, yeah, it's just going to be what Joshua Sijuadi presents in his paper, response to the logical problem of the incarnation. And there's going to be these qua clauses or respects we speak of Christ, where we can attribute or predicate something regarding Christ as a divine subject, right? And regarding Christ as a human subject. So we can essentially and aptly predicate these things by way of um, a nature, right? So
Mhm.
why would you say this doesn't reconcile the issue in all cases? Where do you think that that fails?
Yeah, so here's some examples. So the idea is God the Son is supposed to be human in virtue of or qua like having a human nature. So he's got this physical body and he's supposed to be attached to a soul, is the at least the Chalcedonian view. Um, and I'm like, okay, keep going, keep going. And it's like he's timeless. I'm like, how is he timeless? Well, he's timeless qua divine nature, but not qua human nature. And I'm like, so what's the thing that has the timeless property? And like the divine nature. I'm like, okay, what's the person though that has both of these properties? And that's where things get kind of weird. Is you can understand like some cases like I'm white qua teeth because well my teeth are not as white as they should be. I need to go to the dentist. But um, but you would say like but like but you're brown qua hair. And I'm like, okay, I can see because I have these different parts. But these are not like contradictory properties like timeless and temporal. And so when you start asking a question about what's the thing like that is the person, and you say like, oh, what's this? The sun. I'm like, okay, well, what's the sun? Well, the sun on like classical theism, for example, is identical to the divine nature or the divine substance. I'm like, okay, so that's the thing that has the timeless property. How does that thing have the temporal property? And then you have to go, well, actually, what has the temporal property is the soul and the body. And I'm like, so does the person of the sun actually have that property? And that's where things get really weird. And so what you see in a lot of different critiques of the qua move. So Robin Lepetoven brings this up. The common complaint is that you start you changing the subject. You start giving all this nice like logical symbols, but then when it comes to actually developing the metaphysics of how that works, you start talking about something else. And so I
Right.
think this is what goes on. I haven't read Sijuati's paper on this, but like I think this goes on a lot in Tim Paul's paper. is in some of these cases, what you have is you start changing the subject. This is J.C. Beale's critique of the qual move as well, saying it can handle some cases, but in a bunch of these, it's just
You would
changing
say
the subject.
it almost falls into, well, not almost, but it does fall into the areas of heresy, at least for the likes of Chalcedon, right? Because we don't want
It
to
might.
divide Christ into two persons, right? We want to, maintain that unity within the one person regarding the natures, right? Um,
Yeah,
I guess
yeah,
like
exactly.
if you read the early church fathers, people like Damascene want to say, well, a human nature is one out of two, right? Rather, we have this soul nature and this body, which is a composition. Then I guess you could say, well, we have these corporeal elements which we attribute to our flesh, and then we would say, well, the soul is incorporeal. Would you say that's a contradiction, given the more, you know, antiquitous thought, or what like the early church believed, I guess?
Yeah, because I'm a substance dualist, so I'm happy with this case. Say like this one I can make
Right.
sense of because I got the metaphysics, so I can say like I am immaterial in terms of I am a soul, and I'm physical in terms of I am embodied. There's an embodiment relationship. The soul is embodied in this physical chunk of matter over here, and
Yeah.
I've got the metaphysics there to help me go. Okay, I understand what these qual moves are doing there. So the problem I have with when it comes to a lot of these different accounts of the incarnation is the metaphysics get conveniently silent on certain parts where it's sometimes it's what I call like a conveniently incomplete story, where you can't object to my view because well, there's no contradiction here or here, and you're like, yeah, but that's because you refused to tell me the details of your view. And I think that's kind of what's going on in a lot of these cases with the metaphysics of the incarnation. This is a conveniently
All right.
incomplete story.
Okay. I had one more question, if possible. Um, when it comes to people like William Alston, uh, and Saint Augustine, and Thomas Aquinas, and kind of viewing God's knowledge in this simple way, uh, would this be like unintelligible to you, right? Kind of viewing God's knowledge as being like non-propositional. Do you
Um,
understand what thinkers
oh yeah,
like this mean? Um,
uh,
or like
yeah,
kind
that's a
of
good
reject
question.
that idea? Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think that Alston's view is the same as like Augustine or Aquinas. I think I actually don't understand Alston's
I,
view at all.
I,
This
I would
non-propositional
agree.
view.
Yeah. I mean, he
Uh,
does
yeah,
reference
go ahead.
Aquinas in his footnotes, but obviously his views like a bit different. But yeah, I would agree. So,
Yeah, so what I see in Augustine and Aquinas, and a lot of people, is something I feel like I can make sense of. So Augustine gives this example. He says, our knowledge is either based on introspection, we reflect on ourselves and we figure some stuff out. It's based on perception, I look around and see some stuff or sense some stuff, or testimony. And you're like, okay, cool. These are my sources of knowledge. Sure, you might want to say Augustine, there's a few more, but Augustine's like, just stick with me for a second. Well, in the case of God, perception doesn't work. Got to get rid of that because you don't want God's knowledge being dependent upon things outside of himself. I'm like, okay, keep going, Augie, keep going. And he's like, and God's knowledge can't be based on testimony because again, that would mean God would be dependent on for his knowledge and other things. We don't want that. I'm like, okay. And he's like, well, then all that's left is introspection. God just knows himself. He knows his own nature. He knows his own substance, and thus knows all things. Now, I can understand how God reflecting on himself can give him lots of knowledge, what later becomes called natural knowledge, knowledge of all the things that are logically possible, all the things that could happen. The problem that I have is I don't see how knowledge of yourself is going to get you knowledge of what would happen or what will happen. And Aquinas tries to answer the what will happen question, and I think he does a good enough job. I just don't like the answer, what it entails. God knows what will happen because he knows the cause, uh, meaning God's going to cause everything to happen. So you get this kind of what's called theological determinism, and you might be able to say theological determinism is compatible with human freedom, but that's the answer to how God gets the knowledge. So it's still knowledge of himself because he knows his own actions. and he knows that he's going to cause all these things to happen. And so I can make sense of that.
Right. So you would say that this idea of one, divine act of intellection, or God's knowledge being simple, is intelligible, but you simply reject it because of its entailments. Like you're not comfortable with, what you would be committed to if you were to hold that view, I guess.
Yeah, two things. One, I wouldn't be comfortable with. I'm not comfortable with theological determinism. And
Right.
then two, I can understand the claim that God's knowledge is based on introspection. But when I
Yeah.
bring in divine simplicity and it's got to be like all these different bits of knowledge are supposed to be identical to each other, that I've never seen a good explanation of. I can't understand that part. I don't even know how to reconstruct the claim really, because
Right.
I just find it so weird. But that just so all I can understand is the basic idea of God's knowledge being introspective. That's all I can understand.
So if you are rejecting that view, do you take it God has this kind of discursive process where he distinctively cognizes these different propositions, and through this he's coming to know all things? And then under your
So yeah,
view, would you not see like even more problems come forward from this, or
I don't think God's natural knowledge would be necessarily discursive. Like I think God could introspect and it just find himself with knowledge of all the logical possibilities. Where I think the discursive or like some sort of kind of deliberation and reasoning would take place is when it comes to why God would create anything at all, and then why God would create this particular universe. So I think that's where some kind of deliberative process of reasoning about all these logical possibilities. I think that's where that stuff would come into play, and there might be problems there. I don't know yet.
possibly because I would, well, I don't want to take on much more time, but it would be interesting to see how you would preserve the immutable nature of God's will, right? Um, because you don't want to say God can change his mind in any respect, or would possibly favor one choice over another. Um, it seems like we're starting to introduce immutability in those ideas. So what would you say like the primary object of God's will is going to be? Would you say like he necessarily wills himself, and then through willing himself, he has, other like secondary objects which he actualizes, or like what would be your response to that, I guess?
Yeah, this is really good. This is a somewhat new project for me. So sometime soon, my little book about a big God is going to come out, and I go through some of these things there. And then I'm going to be working on a larger book on models of God and problems of creation. So I'm going to try to get into these things in a very deep way. Uh, the, the short answer is I think immutability is false. God does change when he performs his actions. He goes from not
Oh,
doing something to doing something. Yeah,
wow. Okay.
yeah.
So you kind of just bite the bullet there. That doesn't seem to be like a compromise for you, I guess.
I mean, his nature in terms of like his essential attributes, like that's not going to
Mm,
change.
okay.
But what he does with his power, like that'll change because he's like, do I want to create a universe? Yeah. And I'm like going from not creating to creating,
Mm,
not sustaining you in existence because you didn't always exist. And then you come into existence and he's sustaining you now. And so these are all new actions.
mm. But you
And
wouldn't
then
say he
God's
has
analogy will change it.
passive potency though, right?
That I do actually, yeah. So in my book God and Emotion, I argue that perfect rationality entails being appropriately responsive to reasons and being appropriately responsive to values. The values of creatures, that's one source of things of reasons to be responsive to, and that's some kind of passive potency.
Mm. Okay. Right, yeah. That was uh that was very good. Thank you for speaking with me. I'll let some other people ask some questions now. I took up, quite a lot of
Yeah.
time.
Reed, you're gonna go and ask.
Yeah, I do have a question regarding the divine attributes, right? You wouldn't say that it's not like a conceptual distinction between between the attributes and the essence, right?
Um, so again, I don't know. I'm sorry. I keep misunderstanding this because I just take an essence just to be a description of the kind of properties that make something the kind of thing it is.
Hmm. So these divine attributes like subsist within the divine essence, you would say.
Well, I don't think they subsist in a definition. I don't know what it means to subsist in a definition. I think they subsist in the substance of God.
Yeah,
God is a
substance.
substance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
God, subsisting within the substance of God, and you have like these many attributes subsisting within the substance of God, you would say.
yeah.
So would you what's the modal status of these divine attributes then?
So the modal status is necessity, if in terms of the essential attributes. Like when God becomes the creator, that's an accidental property, and so that's going to be a contingent property. But like omnipotence, omniscience, these sorts of things, those are going to be attributes that God necessarily has.
Necessarily has. So these accidents, would you say that these are just like mere extrinsic relational properties, or they're going to be like some intrinsic properties?
I think some accidents are intrinsic and some are extrinsic.
Okay.
So like when you become a father, uh, like there's certain actions that you perform to become a father, right? And those actions are intrinsic to agents, and those actions are not things you had to perform. They're going to be accidental intrinsics. And I want to say the same thing about God. Like when God performs certain actions, those are in they're contingent, they're accidental because he didn't have to do them, but they're intrinsic. Um, Same thing with some of his knowledge. So if God doesn't want to create anything at all, well, he knows, hey, it's just me hanging out by myself. But if he creates a universe, he's going to know, hey, I created all this cosmic stuff, and that's going to be contingent knowledge that he comes to have, and that's going to be intrinsic to him.
Yeah. So these properties, though, so you said like divine omnipotence and all these stuff, these are going to be some properties that are going to be necessary. But would you say that these properties are necessary in of itself, or necessary by virtue of the substance? Because substance is also going to be necessary, right? That they subsist within.
Can you restate the question? I think I understand, but I just restate it
Yeah.
just in case.
So regarding the divine properties, would you say that they're necessary in of itself, or they're necessary by virtue of the substance that they subsist within?
It's I'm struggling to quite know how to phrase this. So the way EJ Lowe talks about this stuff is there's essence dependence and existence dependence, and in the case of God, these things are mutually entailing, and so you cannot find the substance of God without his attributes, and you can't find the attributes without the substance. So there's some kind of mutually logically dependence there.
So you
But
would like
the
classify
exact way to,
yeah, sorry
or
about
is
that.
gonna sorry, go ahead. I was gonna say was the exact way to tease that out is something I'm still trying to work on. Um, but yeah. So go ahead.
So so you would like to say that this is like some like counterfactual dependency relationship.
I don't know about counterfactual because well, I mean, because you couldn't have it was just logically impossible to have God without these attributes and the attributes without God. And I
Mhm.
don't know if that's exactly a counterfactual relationship because a lot of times counterfactuals are supposed to be well just things that could be, but they aren't. And I'm going, well, this could not be.
One second, someone came in my room. All right, sorry about that. So
It's okay.
yeah. So you wouldn't classify these attributes are going to be necessary in of itself. They're going to be necessary by virtue of the thing that they depend on. First, they can't be without. They can't be itself without the essence or the substance, right?
Yeah, so this is what EJ Lowe calls existence dependence. So the existence of the attributes depend upon God, but then since everything has an essence by in Lowe's mind, like that's just how things are. It has to be that way. Everything has like in essence, everything has properties.
Yeah.
Well, then God's like in some sense essence dependent upon his properties, but the dependency is it's a logically entailed mutual entailment.
Yeah.
So I lose my grasp on dependency in this case because they're logically entailing.
So they're not going to be self-sufficient, though, right? You want to say that these attributes are going to be self-sufficient.
Yeah, they couldn't. I would lose my grasp on what it means for them to be self-sufficient, since I
The
don't think attributes
existence,
could float free.
yeah, existence in of itself. So if they aren't if they aren't like necessary in of itself, then they would just be contingent in of itself. And if we apply the dependency principle, where purely dependent things form dependent totalities, right? So like, for speaking about like diffusive properties, like they're going to be purely qualitative properties, right? Not quantitative, right? So if dependency is going to be something that is qualitative, then I don't see how that these purely dependent things. I don't see how this doesn't like form a dependent totality.
Yeah, so I want to go back to something I said right before you got into this question, which is I lose my grasp on what I mean by dependency because they're supposed to be logically entailing one another, like the essence and the existence supposed to be logically entailing in the case of God. Um, and so God, with his attributes, just is like this entitatively like single being, and it's necessary. So when I've got this phrase dependency, I'm like, that seems like a weird usage of the word dependency because it's not like they're coming from something else, and it's not like they could come apart or exist apart. So I'm losing my grasp on the word dependency there.
But you wouldn't say dependency has to do with something that can be taken apart. It can be like, if we're speaking like it isn't self-sufficient. You would say that these attributes depend on the substance for its existence. So this would be some form of dependency. And if they're not necessary in of itself, they'll be contingent in of itself. If they're contingent in of itself, then I believe that if they're like purely dependent things, I don't believe that can like form a self-sufficient totality. And then God is going to be contingent in totality, like holistically speaking.
Yeah, I see the argument now. But I think what I'm going to be rejecting is some of the steps earlier on of going. We use these words like EJ Lowe uses these words of essence dependence and existence dependence. But he will admit, and I think needs to be pushed harder on, is I'm losing my grasp on really how this is a dependency relationship, um, because the whole thing's like just necessary.
Yeah, yeah.
S-
So,
yeah.
so like, let's just say that we take like a necessitarian account, right, where everything is like a counterfactual. You would say, um, there's still like some form of dependency, right? So if you already conceded that these attributes are going to be necessarily implicated from the substance or the essence, then these aren't going to be something that's like necessary and necessarily depend on something else for its existence. So if they're purely dependent things, themselves cannot construct a self-sufficient totality. So that would be the argument that I'm presenting. Like, if
Mhm.
you these like attributes are dependent in of itself, then I believe that this is also going to form a dependent totality as well. That's like the argument that I have regarding having like distinct distinct properties within the divine substance,
Mhm.
as you would say. Yeah.
I I need to think about this one more because yeah, no, because I think I'm understanding the argument. But yeah, I need to think about that one more. So yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's good.
I'll add
Yeah,
you as a friend, and then like we can discuss this definitely like in the future if that's possible.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Dr. Ryan. Oh yeah.
CJ, you may ask. CJ. Oh, my bad.
Yeah, I was muted. Yeah, so um, the thing is, I had this question with regards to my friend. My friend has this question for you, Ryan Mullins. He asks, so basically, ask him if commitment to classical philosophical positions such as act and potency, matter and form, or using arguments such as Aristotle's argument from motion, and so on, force one to accept commitments like timelessness, divine simplicity, and so on. Basically, can one hold to these philosophical positions in philosophy of nature? without having to be committed to concepts such as divine timelessness, divine simplicity, and so on. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So Richard Cross talks about this a bit in a few different places. So he says you can have, act and potency, these kind of distinctions, and that's all well and good. And you can still have a cosmological argument where you've got a being who uh, actually exists, actually has certain powers, but doesn't have to exercise those powers. And that's all you need to get like a cosmological argument up and running. Um, just those principles alone aren't going to get you to pure actuality, and they're not going to get you to timelessness and so on. You need to bring in some other things, some other principles, and a lot of those other principles are things I would reject. So some of the Aristotelian categories or Aristotelian ideas, I could be like, yeah, sounds great. Some of the others, I want to go, no, not so much. That's the short answer.
Right. Can you suggest some literature on this? Like, so you mentioned the name. Do you mind?
Yeah, so I'm basing some of this off of so at the University of Lucerne, where I teach, we've got this online master's program, and Richard Cross teaches a course on uh, arguments for the existence of God, and so I was basing some of this off of his lectures. I think he talks a bit about this in his first book on the metaphysics of the incarnation. He goes into this a little bit, but there are other people who do this too. So Tim O'Connor, his book on theism and ultimate explanations goes into some of these kind of issues. He does it in a lot of his other papers as well. Uh, Josh Rasmussen does some of this in his various cosmological arguments. So does Swinburne. Um, so those are some people to look for, like their books on cosmological arguments for the existence of God.
Cool.
All right.
One last
Oh,
question.
go on.
You mind? Yeah, my last question would be regards to Gregory Fowler, right?
Oh yeah.
Fine.
hmm
So I wanted to understand his position because I read his paper, but I could not understand his position regarding attributes, properties of God. Does he take properties of God as concrete when he talks about diffusion?
Gosh, it's been a few years since I've read Fowler's paper. I remember he was arguing for what is it, priority monism, and I don't think it really takes a stand. I don't think priority monism necessarily takes a stand on um, h- how you understand properties. The main claim is that you've got this one substance that's prior to everything else, and those substances can have properties. So I think it's a different conversation entirely, and I don't remember him specifying like if this is a part whole relationship or anything like that.
Yeah, he
I
does.
think what he
I
was
have the
he
paper
does.
open with
Okay.
me.
Sorry to interrupt. What Fowler argues for is not priority monism; it's divine priority over
Yeah,
divine
Gregory
simplicity.
Fowler. Gregory Fowler has this paper on philosophical investigations. He actually goes over this alternate to divine simplicity. He tries to argue for the doctrine of divine priority as opposed to divine simplicity, and trying to defend divine ex-deity with multiple attributes and being separate from one another. So he argues from metaphysical dependence relationship between the fact that God is the attributes are metaphysically dependent on God, and argues that you can still save divine anxiety with that. So he's basically making a case for that in this paper with this mirror. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's been a few years since I've read this, so I can't quite remember all the details of how it goes.
Yes, CJ, what Fowler argues is somewhat similar to like Taftazani's position. Taftazani said that all the divine attributes are contingent or they're dependent on the divine essence, right? And they're necessary through another. Um, so Fowler says the divine attributes or properties are dependent on God. So then, therefore, God is still sovereign, and you still have aseity according to this argument.
Yeah. So the idea is basically he's trying to defend the idea that apart from divine simplicity, where you're making the identity claim about these attributes being identical to God's essence, you can still defend with the fact that God's attributes are separate, not identical to God's essence. And he talks about this mereological, the thing you mentioned earlier, Kalindani, with regards to these different theories of mereology. He talks about mereology quite a lot. This idea of mereological fusion is a separate talk in mereology. He talks about this mereological fusion between the attributes and the zat, or the essence of God. So he talks about that, how that could help in trying to frame it. So yeah, he goes over the whole. It's a pretty extensive paper.
All right. So there's a question from chat, basically about free will. Let me read it out. So what is the nature of God's omnipotence in relation to human free will, and how does it reconcile with the existence of evil in the world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just very small questions. Yeah. Um, so there's a couple different views you could have. One is occasionalism, where God's the only thing with real causal power. So God's causing like all the things that are happening, and He's causing your actions. He's causing your thoughts. He's causing, on and on it goes. That's one view you could have. I don't like it. There's this other view called concurrence, which is supposed to say God does give creatures genuine causal power, but on a lot of the versions of concurrence, God has to cause you to cause things. So like you can't use your causal power unless God causes you to cause things. I'm like, that doesn't sound like He really gave you causal power. So there's this other view, the one that I'm more attracted to, which is called mere conservation. And on mere conservation, God's just sustaining you in existence, but He's not causing your actions to, in any way, He's not causing your thoughts. He's just keeping you in existence, keeping you going. And so you have genuine causal power to do stuff, and you have a mind that can really, do things. And so that's how I would see the relationship between omnipotence and human freedom is in terms of just mere conservation. Now, when it comes to evil, that's a much more complicated story. The short answer is I'm affirming something kind of like John Hick or Richard Swinburne's view that God's reason to create a universe is in order to enter into friendship with as many like self-conscious creatures as possible. Not the only reason, but one reason. And the kind of universe you need to create in order to make that happen is a universe where these creatures are able to perform free actions in a way that they can actually form their character, their moral character. And that entails the very possibility, maybe even the inevitability, that certain evils will happen. But God's got a good reason to permit these sorts of things because He's got a good goal in mind of trying to enter into friendship. That's the very, very short, sloppy version. I give a longer version in like I mentioned earlier, my forthcoming book on A Little Book About a Big God. I go into some of the more the details there.
Zach, you may ask your question.
Wait, read what's first though. Read what's first one.
It's fine. You can ask his asked before.
Okay, all right. So my question would be, how would you, as a Christian, reconcile with the idea of the problem of animal suffering without having to eventually appeal towards like mystery?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I go back and forth on this. Some days of the week, I'm like, animal suffering. It's gonna fit into God's like larger project of creating a universe where, like everything I just said before, it's gonna fit into that sort of story. I don't really see animal suffering as being a unique problem. If the worry is, well, God, like these animals are completely unnecessary to the project of soul making because they don't have souls. I don't know. I'm not. I guess I'm not bothered by that because I don't think that's the only reason God creates a universe. I think one reason God creates a universe is like the soul making project. But another reason to create a universe is to try to get as many possible things on the great chain of being. And the kind of universe you create in order to get as many different things on the great chain of being, as far as I can tell, like one good way to do that would be an evolutionary universe. It's a way to get a universe that's got its own kind of autonomy and that could possibly give rise to a lot of different things in the great chain of being. Well, the evolutionary process, if that's what you want, you're going to get some animal suffering along the way.
All right, Zach, you want to ask any more questions?
No, that's it.
All right, Reed, you can ask.
Hey, doctor. Um, I've been looking into arguments for the existence of God. You know, like many are successful, many are not. I've read a couple books from Joshua Rasmussen, being the necessary existence or whatever. He made an argument. I believe it wasn't the, but it's the argument from arbitrary limits. Have you looked into it?
A bit.
Yeah, or basically whatever is limited has explanation, whatever is limited has explanation, and possibly something is unlimited, so possibly something's unlimited. Something is unlimited, then it's perfect. If something is perfect, then it is necessary. So if something is unlimited, it is necessary. If possibly something is unlimited, then there is something that is perfect and necessary. So there's something that is perfect and necessary. Would you agree with this type of argument?
Yeah, I really like Josh's work on this. And one of the things that's interesting is so Josh is an open theist. And so he's given all these arguments and it's getting you to this open theist God, like kind of like Richard Swinburne's like open theism or Timothy O'Connor's open theism. So I find it really fascinating to see that you've got these different kinds of cosmological arguments that you can run, and it doesn't necessarily it leads to different models of God or conceptions of God.
Would you say that this argument is sound?
Um, I mean, I need to study it more closely to say it's sound, but I find it plausible. So you could easily persuade me that it's sound, but I need to look at it more closely.
So if like, how would you respond to the critique if I said that the Trinity is like 1, 2, 3? It's going to be like a quantitative arbitrary limit. How would you respond to that? Not like falling into this like when you're making the contingency argument, you make like there's like a contingent set, and like
Mhm.
there's things that fall into that. How wouldn't the Trinity not fall into this? How
No,
wouldn't the
that's a
Trinity?
really good question. Yeah, because like Swinburne, he mentions this like in a couple footnotes in the existence of God, and it's kind of hand waving in my opinion. He's like, well, because this is the way Swinburne talks. He's like, the Trinity makes it more complicated, so I have to change our calculus. And I'm like, yeah, it's more complicated, but give me an explanation here. And then he tries to give the love argument um, to say that like this is all necessary. And I said earlier at the very beginning of this whole chat that I don't find any of those arguments convincing. So yeah, I think what you've pointed out is a very serious problem that really bothers me, and I don't have an answer.
Oh yeah. Like I was thinking of becoming like a Trinitarian. This like gave me Shabbat. I couldn't sleep at night. But yeah. I'll
Hmm.
definitely try to like talk to Rasmussen regarding this like objection against the Trinity, and hopefully like I can get it answered. If I get it answered, I might become a Trinitarian. Who knows?
There you go.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was nice talking to you.
Yeah.
Hmm. All right, somebody
Yeah.
asked. Anyways, somebody asked me, or wanted to ask you, but he said narrate this to him, and he said, "How would modal collapse follow if you say God's actions are extrinsic and non-essential under divine simplicity?"
Well, I think that's a denial of divine simplicity because the claim from divine simplicity is that God's actions are identical to God. Um, so yeah, because that's what I say in like the most recent modal collapse paper I've published is to go. You could say that. I don't know what it means to say that these actions are extrinsic because I find that unintelligible. But it's also just a rejection of the classical claim that God's actions are identical to God's essence and existence.
Hmm. I'll give it 30 seconds for him to ask again.
I should also say I can only stick around for maybe like 5 more minutes, so I can only take a couple more questions.
All right. 2 more questions and that's it.
I think we have
He
a
said,
question
okay,
from.
divine simplicity is the claim that everything intrinsic and eternal to God is God. But if you say that God's actions are not intrinsic and extrinsic, you can still maintain divine simplicity by virtue of the fact that God's intrinsic properties are really Him in reality. And you can maintain divine simplicity and simplicity, but just say these actions are extrinsic, non essential, thus contingent, and can be otherwise. And that would not be effectuated to God's essence. How would you respond to this?
Yeah, so if you're working with that, like that underlying, Augustine slogan, like all that is in God is God, and then you just say, yeah, actions aren't in God. Um, yeah, I just don't like. So yeah, so that like I can see the move, and that's really clever. I just don't know what extrinsic actions mean. So when Matthews Grant lays it out, he says extrinsic action just means there's a universe, and it has the property of being dependent upon God, and there's no like thing about God that's like doing anything at all. There's just the universe with this property, and he compares it to like reductive physicalism. So when you talk about like these mental properties or anything like that, they're like, no, it's just the brain. That's it. That's all there is.
Mm. I
And I'm
think
like,
that is going. Yeah, my bad.
yeah, yeah. And so I'm like, so this is like what Grant's up to, and I find this, and then he has this charge that he tries to deal with, which is that's just unintelligible, and I don't think he's really dealt with the unintelligibility charge, because all this discussion in his book on free will and universal divine causality, the whole discussion he gives, he starts switching back to this intrinsic account of action to try to illuminate the extrinsic accounts, and so all the examples he gives of to try to like bolster his case are cases of intrinsic actions, and so I just find it unintelligible. So here's a case of this. So earlier when I was talking about extrinsic knowledge, so extrinsic knowledge is there's just a bunch of facts out there, and I don't have any internal states that represent them or anything like that, but I know everything because there's a bunch of extrinsic facts out there. Well, I could say the same thing about the universe. So you and I, we could both say we're omnipotent and we created the universe, and you're like, well, how? And I'm like, well, the universe just exists. It's out there. And you're like, well, is there anything like did you did like some sort of intrinsic action or something? You're like, no, 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 no. I didn't do anything. But trust me, dude, like the universe depends upon me and I'm omnipotent. I feel like you get this parallel case there with like you get with extrinsic knowledge. And that just seems like really weird to me.
Mm. I Kata, you have the last question. You can go on.
Oh yeah, Lulushka.
But it was bugging out for me. Let me invite him.
Yeah, man, me too.
Have you ever seen when a
Yeah,
Yeah,
there you
what
go.
a moron. Anyways, that wasn't even funny. Cause someone. Anyways, look. Yeah, yeah. Kata, you can ask. Yeah.
So I think moral realism is true. I don't know what Lance Bush's trilemma is. So I need someone to tell me what the trilemma is.
I'm waiting for him. I don't know if these people have like social anxiety. They just leave mid conversation. Bro, we're like behind the screen. We're not even staring at each other.
Yeah, I mean, you guys could ask a different question then if you want. Since I don't even know what the trilemma is.
Hello.
There we go.
Hey, how are you, Dr. Mullins?
Good.
So Lance puts forward like this kind of like trilemma against realism. The trilemma goes like unintelligible, false, and trivial. So he wants to say accounts of moral realism that are like the non-naturalist kind some like robust realist notion is going to be unintelligible because he doesn't understand like what this irreducible, complex like prescriptive odd is. Something kind of akin to like the kind of like a queerness objection kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of trivial notions he wants to put forward are something like the moral naturalists who just say that like what's wrong is just suffering, like adverse amounts of harm. He wants to say like, well, yeah, but that's just like redefining like what morality is. And then he wants to say that any false notion of moral realism is just one that invokes entities that don't exist. Where he says most of these like will come from theistic notions of moral realism, but he also wants to say something like, look, if there's even a like non-natural conception that I can come to know about or understand, like maybe some Platonic notion, maybe I can grasp that concept, but I just don't think there are any of those like entities. So like I can just be an error theorist about those kind of concepts.
Okay. I guess I'm not seeing why this is a trilemma. So the first issue is like he just doesn't understand what the ought is. I guess my only reply is, oh, I'm sorry, he doesn't understand that. Most people do. The second one is what? So there's doesn't understand doesn't understand it, and then there's the what was the second one?
Trivial. So
Trivial.
like naturalistic accounts.
Oh, like naturalistics accounts are trivial,
Yeah,
or
well, that's what
non-naturalistic.
naturalistic accounts.
Oh well, I'm not a I'm a non-naturalist about these things, so I guess I'm not understanding like this one. Um, yeah, because I'm not. Yeah, I don't think moral properties are reducible to physical properties. So
Mhm.
so I'm just like okay, cool, um, irrelevant. So what was the third one is?
False. So like
Oh,
some sort of
yeah.
like notions that involve divine command theory, where he just thinks like God doesn't exist.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I guess yeah, if you don't think God exists, that's fine. Eric Wielenberg is like, yeah, God doesn't exist. Here's this vast Platonic realm of all these propositions that describe like what you ought to do. So I guess I'm finding this trilemma kind of irrelevant um, to a lot of the debates about moral realism. But maybe it's just because I'm not quite understanding the trilemma.
Sure, thank you. I mean, I wasn't the one that posited the question, so I don't
Yeah,
know
but
if
I'm
they're
glad
still
someone could
here.
clarify it. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know if people want to know like some robust defenses of moral realism. Terence Cuneo's got a really good book that came out several years ago. It was one of the ones I used when I taught moral philosophy at Cambridge. Russ Schaffer Landau's book on moral realism is kind of a classic. Um, there's this guy named Finlay. He's got this paper. It's really nice, short and sweet in the philosophy compass. I think it's called the Four Faces of Moral Realism. It's like only like 10 pages, and he lays out here's all these different versions of moral realism. And then things have advanced a lot since I taught that course. And I've not kept up to date on these things. Um, yeah, like so, like Wielenberg's book of Virtue in a Godless Universe, I think is what it's called. That's his defense of like this sort of robust moral realism without God. But yeah,
All right.
that's all this one I've got though.
Yeah. Thank you to everybody tuning in for the event. Thank you for Dr. Ryan Mullins and Dr. Khalil for also engaging in the event. I hope everybody has a great time. You can tune in to the other VCs to
Yeah,
engage
just
in
a
more
second.
conversations.
We'll all be going to Atlas of Reality, inshallah.
المشكلة ما نقدر نسوي end والله أكو